Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarlane. This one is episode 227, and the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/227. And this week's episode, I didn't do an interview for the show, but I had the pleasure of appearing on a panel about Nancy Pelosi's Taiwan trip. And that panel was recorded on Wednesday, which was the day after she actually made her appearance in Taiwan. And that was a great panel, and I'm going to run it on this show because I think it's a chance for us to get a little bit outside of just the Patrick McFarlane opinion bubble, because I had the pleasure of appearing with Connor Eccles from Responsible Statecraft. He is a foreign policy reporter over there. JoAnne Leon, who is host of the Around the Empire podcast and a friend of the show, along with her co-host Dan Wright. And also Peter Lee, who I think I've referred to a few times on this podcast, who has appeared on the Scott Horton show and has been interviewed by Scott, someone I've relied on for some of my Uyghur genocide claims analysis. He was appearing on the panel, but he had internet connectivity issues because I think he was actually, I don't know if he was in China or if he was somewhere else at a hotel, and the internet just wasn't very great. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to participate as much as we had hoped he would be able to, because I think he has some great insights. But you'll see that throughout the discussion, my ideas get some pushback, and I give some pushback, and it's not that we all agree on everything. And I think it was great, though, because we have that chance of interacting and of getting more information. And I think that Connor specifically made some really good points about the Taiwan situation and what the U.S. State Department and the U.S. government may or may not do. And I think that he made some good points. Also, JoAnne made great points, and I think Dan did a good job of framing the issue and bringing certain ideas to the table too. So all in all, I really enjoyed the panel. I think we're going to be doing more of those. So I'll include that panel, and then I think I'm also going to include my appearance on It's Too Late with Alan Mosley, because he asked me to come on the show also on Wednesday, so that my appearance ran on his show Wednesday night as well. So I thought I'd just throw both in so you guys can get some of the commentary that I'm giving on Nancy Pelosi's trip. I also have an appearance coming up with Tommy Salmons, where he invited me on Year Zero. Of course, Tommy is my co-worker, my colleague at the Libertarian Institute. I don't know when he's going to run that interview. I don't think it's going to be this week, but keep your eyes open for it. So without further ado, I'm going to run the panel on Taiwan and edit it the best I can, but then I'm also going to run my interview with Alan Mosley towards the end of this episode as well. So thank you guys so much. LibertyWeekly.club is my membership website. You can go there to get early access to my content and early preprints of my articles. I've been running a little ragged this week, so I haven't been putting out as much stuff on that front, but I did have these appearances, so things are getting a little bit busy with the law practice, and of course that's my full-time gig that pays all the bills. All right, well, again, thanks so much. Check out libertyweekly.club, and we'll see you next week. Peace.
Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm JoAnne Leon, your host. We have a great panel today. We have Connor Eccles from Quincy, from Responsible Statecraft, Quincy Institute. Dan Wright is co-hosting with me today. Patrick McFarlane from the Liberty Weekly podcast. And you write for Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com, is that right? And
just the Institute. Sorry.
Just the Institute. And Peter Lee, aka China Hand, friend of the show, has been on many times. So if you would, everybody, just to do a quick intro, especially for the audio version of this podcast, so they'll be able to sort out the voices. So maybe start with you, Connor, and then go around.
Yeah, let's do it. So, hey, everybody, my name is Connor Eccles. I'm a reporter with Responsible Statecraft, which is a online magazine published by the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. I cover a pretty wide range of foreign policy issues, but some of those include, obviously, East Asia, as well as the Middle East and the military-industrial complex. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic today.
Awesome.
Dan Wright, co-host of Around the Empire. Observer. There you go. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'm Patrick McFarland. I'm a practicing attorney in private practice in Wisconsin. I am the Justin Raimondo Fellow at the Libertarian Institute, where I write columns mostly on foreign policy lately. My work has appeared at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, well, let's continue on and hope that Peter gets things worked out. He'll come back in. So, of course, we're talking about the current, I don't know if you call it a crisis or what, with China. And we have, let me just start out with some of these videos that I have because, you know, let's see what the Chinese foreign minister spokesman is saying.
As the number 3 official in the U.S. government, in the face of democratic problems in her own country, Pelosi is spending taxpayers' money, using a U.S. military airplane to violate international law, the basic norms of international relations, interfere in other countries' affairs, and undermine their sovereignty and territorial integrity. This can only make the world see the United States' hypocrisy and ugliness more clearly and further bankrupt its credibility.
Yeah, so that, you know, that's not looking good to me. I'll just give you a couple others we have, this one's from CGTN, and it's showing that the PF
这次联合军事行动是针对美和台当局在台湾问题上的危险举动所采取的必要举措，战区组织多军兵种部队成体系、全要素展开，进行联合封控、对海突击、对陆打击、制空作战等多科目针对性演练和精导武器的实弹射击，全面检验武器装备性能和部队联合作战能力，做好应对一切危机事态的准备。我们正告那些心怀不轨的篡台人员和台独分子，东部战区部队有充分的信心和能力反击一切挑衅，坚决捍卫国家主权和领土完整。
And then just one more from our side. John Kirby has been jumping in on the White House press briefings of the last 2 days, maybe did again today, I'm not sure. This is from yesterday, what he said, what he had to say about the situation with Taiwan and China.
Now on to Taiwan. As you have all seen, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, arrived in Taiwan earlier this morning, East Coast time. As we have said, the Speaker has the right to visit Taiwan. And a Speaker of the House has visited Taiwan before without incident, as have many members of Congress over the years, including this year. Now, this trip was the Speaker's decision, and Congress is an independent branch of government. You all know that. We're obviously monitoring her travel, as we always do for members of Congress, and we've taken all appropriate measures to ensure the safety of her travel throughout the region. Let me be clear. The Speaker's visit is totally consistent with our long-standing One China policy. We've been very clear that nothing has changed about our One China policy, which is guided, of course, by the Taiwan Relations Act, 3 joint U.S. PRC communiques, and the 6 assurances. We've said that we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. We've said we do not support Taiwan independence. And we've said, as I said again yesterday, that we expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means. And we have communicated this directly to the PRC at the highest levels, including in last week's call between President Biden and President Xi. The National Security Advisor, Secretaries of State and Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have also made this very clear to Beijing in a half a dozen recent high-level conversations. Now, we've seen a number of announcements from the PRC in just the last several hours that are, unfortunately, right in line with what we had anticipated and what we talked about yesterday. Now, there's no reason, as I said yesterday, for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with longstanding U.S. policy, into some sort of crisis, or use it as a pretext to increase aggressiveness and military activity in or around the Taiwan Strait, now or beyond her travel. And again, as I made clear yesterday, before the speaker's travel was confirmed by her, China has positioned itself to take further steps. And we expect that they will continue to react over a longer-term horizon. I couldn't give you a date certain of what that horizon looks like, but we certainly would expect them to react even beyond her trip, including announcing additional large-scale live fire exercises. Of course, they've already started doing some of that today, flying across the median line. We've seen press reports of them doing that today, and using economic coercion. It's exactly in line with the playbook that we anticipated and talked to you about yesterday. The United States will not seek and does not want a crisis. We are prepared to manage what Beijing chooses to do. At the same time, we will not engage in saber rattling. We will continue to operate in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific as we have done for decades. We will continue to support Taiwan, defend a free and open Indo-Pacific, and seek to maintain communication with Beijing. We will keep doing what we are doing, which is supporting cross-strait peace and stability.
Free and open Indo-Pacific. That's a new doctrine. I was not aware that that was a stated security objective, a free and open Indo-Pacific, which I guess
Resolved by
what?
peaceful means.
I'm sorry, Dan, could you repeat the comment that you just
No,
made?
I was just noting that Kirby announced what I thought was kind of a new doctrine. I'd never heard that a free and open Indo-Pacific was a U.S. claim. I've never heard that before. Maybe it's constant in some of the literature, but I haven't seen that. I guess that means the U.S. is claiming to be responsible for like every seaway in the Western Pacific. Is that sort of like a British Empire, like all the sea lanes have to stay open? Is that what that means? I really don't know what that means. That was an actual question.
I mean, yeah, pretty much, right? I feel like we've really seen the development of even this term, Indo-Pacific, in a lot of ways is not what we used to talk about when we talked about this region, right? And I think the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific has been adrift in the way that we talk about these issues that's ended up being, okay, now we have to really police absolutely everything, not just in the Pacific Ocean, but in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, so they're lumping in the Indian Ocean. Now that's definitely an expansion of billet, because maybe there's a larger meta point for people to weigh in on, is that it seems like, maybe it's just me, that the elite have kind of gone a little nuts in the past few years and sort of hyper aggressive.
Yeah, well, there was all.
Go ahead, Peter.
I think we're still getting the lag. That's such a shame.
Oh, that is
Such a darn shame.
What I was going to say, okay, what I was basically saying was that it seems like they're pushing everything. Originally, the plan was there's going to be a pivot to Asia, which is to say they're going to take operational resources and slowly but surely extricate them from the Middle East and these other issues. I guess Europe would have been on that list way back when, and move them to Asia. And they're going to build a parallel. This is what TPP was.
Well,
I guess geopolitically, was that it was going to be a rival to the burgeoning Belt and Road Initiative and these other things. But it seems to me, if I'm following this, that they're basically saying, no, we're going to open up expansion on every front. We're going to try to expand in Europe. We're going to try to expand in the Pacific. We're going to try to expand in South Asia. And I'm kind of confused, because this would seem to be the last point in U.S. imperial history to look at that. I guess AFRICOM was a clue. So I just want people to weigh in on where do these sort of renewed aggression, to my mind, come from? Anybody wants to go? Pat? Anybody?
Well, to me, it seems like this transition to the term Indo-Pacific is a really desperate attempt to make people stop referring to the South China Sea as the South China Sea, because then, at least in optics, it seems like, well, shouldn't China have a say in what happens in the South China Sea?
That's a good point. That's good. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know, Dan. I didn't even notice that that the scope had changed, or the naming, the language had changed.
Well, the ambition, I mean, I never had heard, I guess the theory was that the U.S. is going to have to sort of, and this isn't necessarily the managed decline narrative, but it's going to have to adjust itself to a world where China has some, at least regional influence in East Asia. And it seems like the response from at least DC elites, or whatever, however you want to frame it, the national security establishment, is no. And not only is that we're not going to tolerate that, we're going to start expanding our view of what's under our domain, which at a time of intense political division at home and a time of economic strife still recover, it's just a strange time to do it. Although maybe it leads me back to my Straussian, the Australian, which is like, this is going to unite the country in this grand imperial project, right? Maybe that's the point, but it seems like the worst possible time to just decide we're going to expand on every single front, including new security paradigms like the Indo-Pacific, which now I guess we have appointed ourselves that we're going to police it, which I don't know. I don't even know if India is interested in that, because India famously decided to stay pretty neutral on the Ukrainian issue. And when Biden tried to lean on them to not discount Russian energy, they basically told him to take a hike. So I don't even know how India, as a perceived ally, feels about the U.S. declaring itself policeman of the Indo-Pacific. Just the first time I'd heard that term. Maybe I didn't watch the Kirby conference the first time fast enough. Thoughts? Peter?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of...
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Connor. You're there.
No worries. In terms of timeline, the Indo-Pacific thing has been a couple of years. I know that Van Jackson, who is a really good commentator on East Asia issues, wrote a piece about kind of the emergence of that term and the way that it really did change the way that we view our role in Asia. And so I do think that it's a really interesting thing to focus on. It's certainly not new. I would say it's really been in most military and foreign policy kind of elite conversations for the past maybe 2-3 years at least. But it does redefine the vision of U.S. power and the goals of U.S. power in the region in a way that's really expansive and goes far beyond what we could have expected to achieve in the past.
Yeah, maybe that's a good point, because I follow the media pretty closely, but I don't follow the minutia that you guys do at Responsible Statecraft and the Quincy Institute and others do, and Libertarian Institute too. So is this maybe a mainstreaming of a kind of term of art within the establishment? Because I mean, I've watched a lot of press conferences and read a lot. I've never heard that term before. Maybe I'm focusing too much on it, but I was just amazed that. So this is maybe, because that's the thing about the U.S. empire that I always find most problematic, is how little of policy is publicly debated, or that the policy-making process has any kind of democratic input. And I wonder if Americans would understand. I know Americans are historically ignorant of geopolitics and can't find something on the map, but I just wonder, what was the deliberative process of this new doctrine? I guess you can't go back and say the Monroe Doctrine was established so long ago, but I mean, where was the open, transparent process where we've said this is actually, this is our role. It's our job to police this area of the world? Because I can't imagine that has popular support, especially given that that's not going to be a cheap mission to accomplish. You would have to, I guess that's you'd have to build more ships. You'd have to relocate new bases in the area to police the Indo-Pacific. Am I misreading that?
These ships are ridiculously expensive to run and maintain too. I mean, like crazy expensive. Yeah, and I mean, talking about doctrines, what's the story with the One China policy being taken off the State Department website? I heard that. I did not confirm it myself. Does anybody know what's going on with that?
Had not seen that.
Was it just
Yeah,
a rumor?
I don't know about that in particular. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, maybe it's not real. Maybe it's not real.
Yeah, that wouldn't line up with their messaging in other areas either.
What was that? I'm sorry.
That wouldn't line up with the government's current messaging. They do maintain that the policy is the guiding.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, because they're, you saw Kirby and you see other people just reconfirming that that's still our policy. However, I did watch Nancy Pelosi's press conference. I don't know if you guys caught any of it. The whole ceremony when she arrived and now I'm already.
Do you really go rogue? Does anybody JoAnne, anybody? Like, I just can't. The messaging is confusing to me. Did she just decide to do something, or is she a test balloon for the Biden administration? Because Biden famously has quote unquote gaffed multiple times, saying there is some kind of security guarantee for Taiwan, which has gotten a lot of people nervous, myself included. There are such things as secret treaties that we don't know about. But he has multiple times said we've committed to defending them if they're invaded. So part of me wonders, like, oh, is Nancy Pelosi's provocation, or if you want to think of it more positively, support, is this from the White House? But then when you read press reports, it's like, no, the White House is opposed to this, and this is a big headache for them. It just seems weird
there's
that
definitely
she's one rogue and just doesn't doing whatever she wants.
It looks that way. I don't know if it's being made to look that way as a convenient thing, but it does look like there are factions who have different opinions about this whole thing. But she did take a bipartisan cohort of Congress people with her, quite a few of them. And I didn't hear her in her various speeches. There's another press conference that she did just solo, which I didn't watch, so I can't say. But I think she avoided talking about security, but she went whole hog on we support Taiwan and your democracy and freedom, and I don't know if she said autonomy, but whether she said those words or not, I mean, that was a clear message that we're going to support you, all the way. And
how far is all the way?
Well, I actually said that. I mean, she didn't say all the way, but that's how it came across to me. So I don't know if there's some funny business going on here or not. I've heard a few people give opinions on why she did it. One of them being that the Democrats are in really bad shape right now. However, again, she brought a bipartisan congressional group with her. The name for it, they're called delegation. And so some people are saying she's just trying to get attention to raise money for the party, which I mean sounds like this. You know what I mean? It just sounds small in terms of the.
Yeah, it's hard to know the motivations, but I just
size of it. But hey,
double game. Like if it was a double game, or if it was really she just decided to do this, and the Biden White House is powerless to stop her. They're an independent, Congress is independent. I just find that hard to believe. They're both, not just because they're members of the same party, but the idea that the Speaker of the House can short circuit White House policy. That just strikes me as a very odd claim.
She wasn't the first Speaker of the House to go, apparently. But I don't know. Does anybody else have any ideas on what, why she did this, whether she is, whether she is playing a double game where she's going over there to do this and while the administration, pretends to disagree with it, or do they really just, I don't know. And anybody's thoughts are welcome on this.
I tend to think that the Biden administration, or the White House at least, left itself a lifeline in case this went really bad, to say, we told her it wasn't a good idea. And interestingly enough, they put in the qualifier that, well, we don't think it's the right time right now for Pelosi to go visit Taiwan, which I thought was, I think it really hinted at what the underlying policy or position is at the White House, is that they tacitly approve of this, but they let out, kind of a lifeline in case it blows up in their face. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is that with this specific issue, I think that the timing is really crucial. So I don't know if that's necessarily them trying to hide anything. I think that in a lot of ways, the fact that we've seen such an increase in tensions in the Taiwan Strait in recent months is very different. Because originally this was meant to be a trip that comes in April, which is a time in which you're trying to reassure Taiwan about the idea that, you know, what Russia does to Ukraine isn't going to happen to you, right? So that's a whole different context. When it gets pushed back a few months, it suddenly feels like something that's just offensive, that's just provocative. And I also think in a lot of ways that the most important thing here is that whether or not Pelosi and Biden agree on this, the sense in Beijing is that they do. And the sense that they're going to respond to is that they do. And for them, 100% of the time, they're going to consider, as we saw in that video earlier, that Pelosi, unlike how we might see it, is not just the Speaker of the House, but the third in line for the presidency. That's, I think, the most important point there.
How might they respond? Is China gonna? I mean, one of the things that first struck me, and one of the reasons I think a lot of people are probably like, "This is not the time for this," is that there's still a hot war in Ukraine right now, and one of the things China basically, I thought, negotiated with the Biden administration was that they were going to kind of keep a hands-off policy. They weren't going to provide support. They weren't going to help the Russians. And I imagine, and I'm trying to think of what China will do to what it considers an insult. Clearly, I mean, if there's any takeaway from this, I mean, they didn't shoot down the plane, good, but they clearly feel insulted, humiliated, you know, pick your term. And I just thought, wow, maybe China is going to revoke or go back on that deal they made with Biden not to assist Russia and Ukraine as just a sort of a, you disrespect us, we can disrespect you right back. I don't know if that's what they're going to do. I mean, the military exercises thing that they're doing now, which we saw the video of earlier, that's pretty cheap. That's cheap theater at this point. I mean, nobody cares. I mean, I think China understands like that these kind of quote unquote shows of strength or whatever, it's been done 1,000 times. I'm just wondering if I'm them, if that's enough to assuage their sense of embarrassment or dishonor. I don't know. What do people think China's going to do in response to this, I guess is the question.
Let me check in with Peter real quick. Peter, has your connection improved at all? Let's see if we can hear you. He's in a hotel and it has crappy Wi-Fi. What a bummer.
I don't hear him.
I don't hear him. So, okay, sorry about that. I don't know. I was pretty nervous. I was trying to. I was pretty nervous about their initial comments about how there would be some kind of a retaliatory strike, using the word strike. Now, it's not that I'm not nervous anymore. I guess I'm a little bit less nervous that they're going to invade at the moment. But they are running these exercises. I saw one map where I might be able to pull up a picture of it. You know, the locations of where these exercises are being held, or they just completely surround the island, you know. But I also saw I read some of the Global Times op-eds and articles, and one of them talks about how you know, there's going to be a response, and it's not going to be a one-off. See if I can find that one for you. And there's been a lot of talk about how either individually Nancy Pelosi is going to need to, you know, take responsibility for what happens, or the U.S., you know, just a lot of attempts to say, you provoked this. And then one other article talked about how this is going to accelerate the reunification with Taiwan. So almost like taking the opportunity to do something they wanted to do anyway, but just saying, you know, we're going to need to reunify more quickly now because of what Pelosi did. Pelosi, one more little interesting tidbit. In the press conference that she did, she's there with the I guess president, not prime minister, president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, who's the first female president in Taiwan. I think she's been in for about a year. And so the two of them are there, and I guess somebody asks her about, or Nancy brings up, hey, even not too long ago, other members of Congress came here to Taiwan, and I don't know why. She says, and a big deal wasn't made over that. Well, honestly, I think a big deal was made over that, just not as big as Pelosi. But and then she says, but she, it was okay for the men. She kind of spun it as the reason why China's reacting the way they are is because she's a woman. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's that she is
they wouldn't
Speaker
have
of the House.
cared.
I don't think. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's more of an insult if a woman does it. I don't know.
I don't think so.
I mean, there are some societies that are like that. They'll take something from men, but if a woman does it,
raise your finger if you can hear me.
Oh, I can hear. We can hear you. Yay!
Go ahead, Peter.
It's still the lag.
Is that what's happening?
Here's the thing, Peter. We can hear you, but not until like a minute after you said what you said.
Well, I'm interested to get people's thoughts on. There's this talking point that the White House, I think Kirby mentioned just now that while the Speaker of the House visited in 1997, I believe it was 97, and they're throwing that out as if it's some kind of, that this is an overreaction. And I think there are several differences between that visit. I mean, it came on the heels of the third Taiwan Strait crisis, but I think the circumstances were also different in the strength of China's military at the time as compared to now. And I believe in that visit, Newt Gingrich also visited China during the same visit. So just interested to get people's thoughts on that.
Well, also, I mean, they're acting like, well, why are you responding? They're trying to kind of like gaslight the Chinese. Like, why are you responding?
That was my thought.
International publicity stunt. Like, well, because you did an international publicity stunt. What do you mean? Why are we responding? Like, why do you even care? It's like this. Like, why do you even care? Why are you getting so aggressive? You mad, bro?
Right.
Like, Of course they're upset about it. So yeah, I also, the fact that it hasn't happened for 25 years is indicative of something, isn't it? That maybe it's not a sensitive topic. It also doesn't come on the heels, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but of a president who, it may be gaffe, but it's happened multiple times, has said, like, we're going to defend Taiwan militarily if China tries to take it, which China's position hasn't changed. Their position is, it's ours, we'll take it when we want. So I think this response is so silly. Like, why are you even mad about this? Okay, can China come visit, like Puerto Rico and say, shouldn't you break away from the United States and meet with Puerto Rican separatists or Hawaiian separatists if we're going to be the Indo-Pacific? So, of course, it's upsetting. And I'm amazed that this is the public line they're taking. I don't know what they're saying behind the scenes, but it seems really facile.
I mean, in some ways, it almost reminds me that response. When you think about like a recent example historically, it almost makes me think back to, I don't know if y'all remember, but last year, towards the beginning of the year, there was an Iranian ship that may or may not have been headed towards Venezuela, an Iranian military ship, and it created just, people freaked out in Washington, and everyone was saying that this was the end of the world, that this was coming into basically, our hemisphere. And it's not to say, obviously, that just because we do it, they should be able to, but it is to say, because that's just two empires acting like empires. But it is to say that it's pretty shocking that we can't just take a second and understand that that is how they're going to react. And if we're going to talk about precipitating a crisis, there's an obvious first move here, and the first move is Pelosi arriving in Taiwan. And the idea that we can blame only China for what comes out of it is frankly silly.
Maybe China should visit Venezuela. It's like, oh, why are you mad about this? What? Just one state visiting another. I'm just wondering what they're actually going to concretely do, because I just don't see. I mean, Kirby says it in the press conference. he says, like, we anticipate that they're going to have these threatening military drills. So if I'm the Chinese establishment, and I know the U.S. is anticipating this, but I want to make them pay a price for this public humiliation, disrespect, that's what I did. I don't understand the Chinese government enough to get in their head, but that's what I'm thinking about, at least. Like, what would they do that they consider a proportional response to what they view as an incredible insult? And so that's just, Ukraine came to mind, but it could be other things. I don't know if, I saw funny stuff on Twitter, like they should take over the NVIDIA factory that Nancy Pelosi's husband was doing insider trading in. I don't know if they can do that. But although I have to say, if they did retaliate militarily by bombing the chip manufacturing in Taiwan, that would cripple the U.S. market, because famously the U.S. kind of offshored a lot of our capacity. I don't think that's going to happen. That, to me, is a very severe response. Right. I'm just trying to think, like, what would they do to respond to this? I can't imagine this ends at intimidating military drills. Something else is going to happen. That's my thought, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, well, certainly not. I mean, I think that we're going to see, one thing to be clear is that these drills are quite intense. They almost amount to a temporary, thank you for pulling up the map. I mean, that's nearly a blockade, right, of Taiwan. That's really surrounding it. It's temporary, it's partial, but that's intense. And a lot of that includes what Taiwan considers to be its territorial waters. So that is a significant response. And we're also seeing some, public and non-public responses, including a series of economic sanctions, which can be really quite serious for Taipei, given that a huge portion of their GDP relies on trade with China, with mainland China, as well as a range of different cyber attacks and things like that. So I think it's going to be hard to know exactly. I don't think we'll publicly know exactly what China's response was, but I think it's going to be significant based on sources I've been talking to compared to prior crises.
Did you hear any specifics, Connor?
It's just this increase of cyber operations and economic things. And the problem that we're going to be facing is that if the U.S. continues to move these aircraft carrier groups into the area, there's just increased chance for something weird happening. That always happens with these. It's kind of bringing us all to the edge. It's brinksmanship, and it's worrisome, from both sides.
What is the U.S. excuse for the U.S. being, right? As I understand it, a naval ship, a U.S. naval ship, went through the quote unquote Taiwan Strait, meaning it traveled, I guess, in that area between Taiwan and China, right? That's the Taiwan Strait, correct?
Correct.
What is the point of that, if not to be provocative? Like, what is a North American power doing, putting U.S. naval ships, military ships, through the Taiwan Strait, if not to provoke China? Like, what else would that possibly be for?
Right? Well, they say it's maintaining freedom of navigation, right?
Another self-appointed mission. Who would ask you to do that? But that's the other part. Maybe that makes sense in terms of response. Like, how is the U.S. saying, as Kirby said, that Taiwan is not independent, that they believe in the one-child policy? Freudian slip. One China policy, but China has a one-child policy. And yet at the same time, they're moving naval vessels through what China considers to be its territory. I just feel like the U.S. position is already kind of incoherent, and I think Nancy Pelosi just added to the incoherence, publicly at least. Privately, I think it's to protect Taiwan, but I'm saying publicly, it just seems like they're these intersecting, oh no, we want peace, we don't like military maneuvers, but yes, we're going to shove our naval ship right through that strait just to stick it in your eye. Because unless there's some other reason to do that, I can't think of one.
I think that there can be an argument made in favor of freedom of navigation operations, especially in that area, because the territorial claims of China are so large. And that is really something that bothers a lot of their neighbors as well. And up to this point, that hasn't had an effect, but it could in the future. I will say that doing a bunch of those coinciding with this Pelosi visit is quite worrisome. That really does, like you're saying, feel like something that's just guided towards provoking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the maritime rules, but I would imagine if any place, if we were going to say yes, we usually the term that they use that I've seen in communications is we recognize China's sovereignty over Taiwan. Well, that would seem to be the strait would definitely be in their sovereign territory, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that area in particular be if you're going to say they have sovereignty over Taiwan, even if we want autonomy? Wouldn't you agree that that strait would be sort of clear? You know, we wouldn't accept, you know, Delaware River is a strait, or not at the like the Hudson or something. Like this is clearly. Yeah, it just seems, I don't know, maybe I'm misreading how severe.
Well, we don't recognize their sovereignty, to be clear. The one China policy includes us acknowledging that there is one China and that it involves two groups of people on either side of the Taiwan Strait. So it's really vague. It's one of these weird, it replaced that prior diplomatic fiction that pretended that somehow Taipei was controlling all of mainland China, which is silly. And it replaced that with a new one that's been much more effective, which is just this idea that both sides believe that they are the rightful heir to a China that includes both Taiwan and mainland China. And that does not include an actual recognition of Beijing's active control over that area.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's okay. Maybe that does make a little bit more sense then. I mean, it doesn't make any more sense in terms of provocation, but it does make sense in terms of some of the messaging. I mean, at some point, here's the two theories I've heard of this. One, at some point, China's just going to invade and take it, and it's 23 million people in Taiwan. It's 4 billion people in China, or maybe less than 1.4. And there's no way Taiwan can actually. It'll be costly. But the other theory was that there would be a convergence between the two, meaning China would basically buy Taiwan. All the companies would basically be owned by China, and eventually it would kind of be a slow squeeze, like I guess Hong Kong, although Hong Kong was explicitly recognized as China. I don't know. I wonder if these kind of moves increase the likelihood. I just wanted to comment on this of China militarily taking Taiwan. Is that likely from anybody's perspective? That this is going to lead, that this is sort of putting us on the path rather than the buying out of Taiwan to an actual hostile invasion, or no?
Let me just real quick, let me read what Peter's contributing via comment here. Still got the audio issues, which is a real bummer. I really wanted to hear from him. So we can a little bit. He's saying this is from a longtime listener. From longtime leader Peter Lee. Oh, he's joking with me. It's from Peter. He says the PRC has frequently advised the Biden administration that it claims the right to manage the Taiwan Strait as an internal waterway. I believe the Biden administration ambivalence about the Pelosi trip grew out of an awareness that China would use it to accelerate and escalate its control of the Taiwan Strait, first through military drills and eventually by closing the strait to conformity with the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. He says the legal basis is surprisingly robust.
Oh, okay. So that one of the consequences would be they'll actually close the strait.
I definitely get the sense that China is using this to escalate things that and justify things that they otherwise wanted to do. I also, which I don't know, maybe I could just throw this in as devil's advocate, but I kind of feel this way too. I think it is an ridiculous overreaction, the way that China's treating this. I mean, if you look at some of the language, it's really nasty, insulting language, really loud, and well, that has been, and I'm not saying that we don't, none of it's justified and not or deserved. I'm just saying it's quite. I think they look foolish, to be honest.
Isn't it for domestic consumption? I think when I see those videos, I think one of them you showed me with the commentator who's actually just taking videos from Chinese social media. JoAnne, if you remember who that was, I believe his name begins with an S or something. It's Brenza. But in any case, it seems like the domestic consumption for China, who has these problems, right? They have their COVID lockdown policies. There's some kind of blow up in their mortgage market or something going on with
That's a big one.
people.
Yeah, people stop paying their.
This
yeah.
seems, if anything, for domestic consumption, because apparently one of the few things, it seems, again, it's hard to get a real read on a sort of closed society, but is that almost every person in China, even more so than Russians in Ukraine, much more so, people in China believe Taiwan is part of China. And making this a big deal, while obviously part of U.S.-Chinese relations, but it also seems like it's a way for Xi to sort of shore up popularity by sort of standing up. You know what I mean? So I don't see like it's kind of almost a win-win. They want to do these things anyway, and this spurs their popular support by having this question. So I mean, maybe it's an overreaction, although you got to know this was a touchy subject. It'd be weird if it was a muted reaction, if they were just like, well, 25 years.
Yeah, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying, even so, it's not a popular opinion. I realize.
Well, to me, it seems like if you take a look at Chinese history, of course, the Taiwan issue is incredibly emotional to them as a people, because from what I've learned, I mean, of course, you have a history of China being kind of under the boot of foreign influences for the last 200 years, give or take a bit. So to me, it makes sense, but of course, I don't condone their reaction, but it makes sense. And in the predictability of this reaction is something that I've taken a close look at in some of my work. But there does seem to be this strain of thought, and I've heard from the hawks that this is China provoking a conflict to increase the speed with which they retake Taiwan. But in the way I look at it, it seems that if China really is a rising power, like everyone seems to say that they are, well, shouldn't they just be playing the long game to reunite with Taiwan diplomatically, and maybe militarily later as a last resort? To me, it seems like this is the West, or at least the United States, trying to foment a run on Taiwan, because they figure if China is a rising power, then
better now than later, right?
Better now than later, basically, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I also do hear that term a lot. You said 200 years, but I hear it in Chinese media when you translate it or you see it translated, it's century of humiliation.
Century, yeah. Well, I was thinking when the United States got involved in the first Opium War, it was at the 1840s, I believe. So I guess that's when I approximate it. But
okay,
Connor,
that term itself, though, Patrick, you hear that term, right? Because I keep seeing that over and over again. Maybe
I do.
Pattern recognition or something, but it's like century humiliation. I'm like, and I guess the U.S. was part of that. I thought it was more the British when I think of the Opium Wars, but I guess the open door policy, was it called, or something, that we basically said they had to participate. So yeah, I guess that plays to the nationalism in China, that sense of resentment or aggrievement. But yeah, I think you're right. That is, it's the U.S. might be provoking it because it's like, geez,
they know they can.
while we can, before they become even more powerful and influential than they are now.
Right.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, it's unclear to me if the goal, I would say it's unlikely that the goal of the U.S. here, or Pelosi specifically, because I do think that it's worth separating Pelosi from Biden. I do not think that they're on the same page about this. If they are, they're really hiding their hand well. But I do think that regardless of the goal, it would be quite silly to try to provoke that now, because most wargaming that we're seeing coming from the Pentagon, as written about by Oriana Schuyler Mastro in Foreign Affairs last year in a quite prominent piece, shows that China wins pretty much every time in a war against Taiwan. Their military is extremely well prepared for this. It is not easy to deter them. And China ends up winning a lot of war games that include the U.S. sending in troops, which is extremely unpopular with the U.S. public. So it's hard for me to believe that Pelosi herself, who's aware of these war games and is aware of what military strategists are saying, would have the goal of actually creating the military conflict now. If the goal is to just highlight the, I guess, hawkish nature of China, then maybe it's been successful. But if the goal is to start a war, then it's a fool's errand.
But yeah, in China, but to that point, like highlighting their hawkishness, but I think China, when it comes on this issue, seems to me, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, they don't really care about international opinion. Even if the entire world was against China on the Taiwan issue, they would stick to their guns on Taiwan. Yes. Because I don't think the legitimacy and part of the CCP, yes, it relies on building prosperity, but it also relies on this policy. This is one of the major foundational principle beliefs of the CCP, right? Or rather, their legitimacy, like we're standing up for unified China. I think, like, to my mind, also I should point out, like, China is very popular thanks partly to the Belt and Road Initiative and their other programs. But even if they weren't popular, I feel like this is one they'd be like, I don't care. Right? Is that a fair assessment that this is such a fundamental issue to China with Taiwan that they don't care about looking a little ridiculous?
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond. So, and none of this is to condone China's actions, obviously, because they are an overreaction and they are unwise, I think, in the long run. But it's important to remember that what we picture as a very unified China is not the same as France, right? It's not an extremely united group. You've got Tibet, you've got Xinjiang, you've got these really different areas that are relying on pretty tenuous things holding them to the central government. And they haven't always been ruled from Beijing, or at least not very long. So for China and for the PRC leaders in particular, this is something that to them seems existential. They're not just proving a point here. Just like in Tibet, they weren't just proving a point in Tibet. They were proving a point in all of the territories where you have different ethnic minorities that are not just Han Chinese people. So for them, from their perspective, it's quite important.
I wanted to comment, Connor, on what you had said earlier, because about provoking a crisis or provoking an invasion of some sort. And I don't disagree with your assessment of it, but I think we might be presupposing the idea that the United States actually wants to protect Taiwan. When I think about it, I envision a situation where the goal is not to protect Taiwan or to prevent China from taking Taiwan. The goal might be to create an Afghanistan or Ukraine situation, a proxy war that goes on in perpetuity. And again, this is just speculation. But when I think about it, that's what I think, that maybe it's just I assume the worst intentions and maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it strikes me as unlikely, to be honest.
Yeah.
Especially because we're not talking about, so without entering into what the actual motivations of U.S. support for Ukraine are, I think that it's worth remembering that Ukraine obviously borders many NATO countries. It's very easy to resupply them comparatively. Taiwan is an island. It's right in the middle of, it's very close to China itself. Even just sending in arms shipments throughout a conflict would be a really complicated maneuver. So I think that would be challenging. Even like the idea that this would even be a boon. For example, if we're going to say that this is going to be a boon for defense contractors, which is true, right? If tensions rise, there will be more defense spending, and maybe we could argue that is one of the motivating factors for some people that are trying to inflate tensions with China. Even with that in mind, I really think that we're only going to be seeing them get the benefits they actually want if they stay on the brink of war. Actually going to war does not necessarily help.
Now, what's your thought on the actual feasibility of amphibious invasion of Taiwan? And I don't, like, to be clear, I don't think that's the only way that China could move on Taiwan, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
To be clear, I am not a military strategy expert. People I have talked to believe that in general, China, it would be bloody, it would be brutal, but they could retake it today. There's a perception. I talked to someone from Defense Priorities, Lyle Goldstein, who's a really excellent analyst on some of these issues, and he's pointed out that basically the only way to stop Taiwan, or to stop a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, is to really build in deep and have this infrastructure that is more similar to the infrastructure that you might see in northern France from the beaches in Normandy, right? These things that really just make it hard to invade and just make that a really drawn out process. Most people think that is what it would actually take. Whereas we've seen more investment in long range missile systems and different things like that could strike mainland China. But as y'all have noted, 1.4 billion people in mainland China versus 20 million people in Taiwan is not a very fair fight. So that's my general sense.
Is the only thing preventing that, I mean, general sense, yeah, I'm not a military expert by any means, is the only thing preventing that in part by China doesn't want to, it's not that they're afraid that they'll be stopped in trying to take it. They're just kind of saying they want to take it in one piece. They want to take it as whole as they can. They don't want to completely destroy it because in part, for people who don't know, we've spent generations, we being the United States, moving a lot of technical and manufacturing and other assets into Taiwan. Taiwan is a major player. Like I talked about the semiconductor role they have in the semiconductor industry. So, it's a very valuable piece to take whole, even for China, as advanced as China is. So I just wonder if, I don't think that they want to have a protracted conflict, but I do think it seems to be, here's my take on it, that everybody seems to be looking for a trigger for them to take it. They're looking for something that's going to finally trigger this takeover, but everybody seems to be of the view, including maybe almost all the U.S. national security establishment, that this is an inevitability. It has that's just kind of the sense of it. There's like an inevitability. And so, I mean, that's my take on it, that they're just basically sort of saying, well, what's going to actually trigger this takeover? And China wants to take it with as little drama as possible. And it seems like there's some people in the U.S., particularly, I always used to see the stuff from the Washington Free Beacon from that guy from Goldfarb who got caught as a lobbyist for Taiwan, but Michael Goldfarb. But they would say, like, we can still win. They can still win. We just need to give them the ages. We just need to keep giving them things. But I don't really see from serious people, these are people without a financial interest, that's even feasible. That, like, they seem to be, it's a fait accompli, I guess. Like, they're going to take it, just under what conditions? Is that a wrong assessment?
The tough thing with that is it requires a lot of kind of reading minds. It's really hard to say when it becomes necessary in the minds of the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party to try to retake Taiwan. I agree that they would really like to do that peacefully. I don't think that their goal is to do it militarily. It's really hard to weigh in on exactly how it would work. But to the point about kind of the strength of Taiwanese manufacturing, and that has been part of Taiwan's calculus. And leaders in Taiwan have pushed for this idea that, TSMC, for example, is one of the world's biggest, microchip manufacturers. They're crucial to the international supply chain. They do business across the Taiwan Strait, and a lot of these businesses do. And part of the logic of developing these microchips and developing these different really advanced technologies that take years and billions of dollars to invest in and to start up these factories is to deter a Chinese invasion. So that's part of it.
Hey everybody, welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. It is at my new membership website, libertyweekly.club. And I know I've been announcing this, but I left Substack, rolled out a new membership website that operates the same way. You get content through your email address, but there's also a web page, libertyweekly.club, where you can go and read the articles. And it works really great so far. Just a couple hiccups in terms of trying to figure out how to use free previews for people who are just signed up to the free newsletter. And for people who sign up through the membership here, you can see that right now I have a $5 a month tier that will get you access to early access to episodes of Liberty Weekly, access to bonus episodes that I've been trying to come out with 2 times a month, preprint access to all my Libertarian Institute articles before they're published, and I'm working on setting up a subscribers-only live stream. I'd like to do that before the end of the month. Which I will announce through the email list. So if you go through, sign up for the email list, libertyweekly.club, hit the subscribe button. You can choose the free tier or you could choose the $5 per month tier, which will get you access to the benefits. But for free content, there still is free content up there. Like I do a lot of article content there. So head on over to libertyweekly.club. The other thing that I'm really excited to announce is a collaboration between myself and Ludwig von Mises Pieces. which is the guy who does all my graphics and thumbnails, and the guy who, he does a ton of awesome work. So you can see Liberty Weekly merch is now available if you head on over to libertyweekly.net this time /merch, MERCH. You'll be able to find Liberty Weekly merch with my new logo with the rising sun and Lady Liberty holding the shield and flag. I really like the logo that he was able to do for me. And you can see that you can get coffee mugs there. You can get sweatshirt. You can get t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. The other collaboration. Oh, and if you use promo code LW10, that will get you 10% off. And it will also get a kickback to me and show him that you bought through my link. But you could also go through all the other merchandise that he has there. There's lots of good stuff. You buy anything in the store with promo code LW10, and I will also get a kickback. You can see a bunch of stickers and t-shirts and designs that people in our sphere of the Liberty movement will just love all that, the merch that he has there. It's original stuff that he's made himself. And we did a collaboration on a t-shirt, that idea that I had, Dissolve NATO, super timely right now. But for those of you just listening to the audio version only, it's the NATO logo that is being shattered into a million pieces, and it says Dissolve NATO on it. So I think it's a really cool, timely t-shirt. Of course, it was an idea that I'd commissioned, and I think that he did an awesome job with it. And if you like my thumbnails and logo art, Ludwig von Mises Pieces did Why I Am Anti-War podcast logo, which is a dove coming out of a helmet. And I really, really like that logo too. So check out this Dissolve NATO. You can get it in sticker format. You can get it on a sweatshirt or a t-shirt. And I'm going to be picking some of these up myself because I think they turned out really awesome. So again, head on over to libertyweekly.net /merch. And to get the NATO t-shirt, head on over to libertyweekly.net /NATO, NATO. All right, so that's all the stuff I got for you guys this week. Thanks everyone for subscribing, all the members at libertyweekly.club. Really appreciate it. You really help me afford all the hosting costs and to upgrade my equipment and all that kind of stuff too. So, all right, thanks. Peace.
Before we wrap up, do you guys want to talk about some of the recent work you've done on these? Or maybe you've already integrated that information into the conversation. You don't want to talk about them specifically, but feel free to do so if you'd like to talk about some of your recent articles on the topic.
Do you want to start, Connor?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I guess we could go. I think this is something that's gone a little bit under the radar, and I really do think it's worth talking about, is the Taiwan Policy Act that Senators Bob Menendez and Lindsey Graham recently introduced. So they introduced this. Yeah, so it's the As Pelosi Taiwan Visit Looms Menendez bill would get one China policy is the name of my article in Responsible Statecraft. You can find this at responsiblestatecraft.org. And basically this policy, according to experts that I spoke with, would essentially get rid of most of the practical aspects of one China. So, if this Pelosi visit is something that undermines one China in an action, this is something that's going to really shift the policy in that direction. It's touted by the sponsors of the bill themselves as the most fundamental change to Taiwan policy since the Taiwan Relations Act, which was from 1979. And it has all kinds of different things, including officially designating Taiwan as a major non-NATO ally and adding billions of dollars in weapons funding for them, as well as various different things that the general perception among people I've spoken with is that these are meant to approach Chinese red lines without actually touching up against them. But that act of slowly inching closer and closer towards these Chinese red lines could have the side effect of encouraging China, like we've been talking about, to make a move quicker or to potentially feel provoked into invading Taiwan. And the real loser here is not going to end up being America. It's not going to end up being China. It's going to end up being the Taiwanese people who, through 40 or 50 years of really careful, balanced policy, have been able to flourish as a democracy, coming out of what was initially a really brutal dictatorship. So I highly recommend that you check this piece out. I think that this has gone a little bit underreported. It was meant to be discussed in the Senate today, but has been postponed until September for now. So definitely keep your eyes on it going forward.
JoAnne and I know, side note, JoAnne and I know about Bob Menendez. He is unfortunately our senator, and he's from New Jersey. And
I didn't vote for him. I haven't voted for him for a long time.
I know. He had this corruption trial. People may forget about it, but he almost went down for this corruption trial. And ever since that happened, partly because some of the only people who supported him during the ordeal, and he barely beat it, were, I guess, the neocon hawks. It's like a vengeance or something. Since that trial and he beat the rap to stay in the Senate, his bills have just been like the most bellicose things I've ever seen. So I don't know if there's some connection there, but he's he's on a mission. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
But he's been even worse than usual. Just a total side note.
Yeah. I will say he's consistent.
Dick Cheney possessed him or something. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Connor.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to say he's a complicated figure. He does rail about human rights related issues in a fairly consistent way, and I don't want to take that away from him. But his hawkish prescriptions for human rights issues are pretty concerning.
Yeah. How about you, Patrick? You have a few things. Maybe you want to talk about one of them? I could pull them up.
Yeah. Well, my most recent big piece is Taiwan and our feigned ambiguity. And in that, I really just go through and talk about this collective kind of gaslighting that's going on. Talking about Biden making those 3 pledges to defend Taiwan against the Chinese invasion. And it started with a Twitter exchange I had with Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, where we were talking about certain provocations and the type of provocation from the United States that garnered the most aggressive response from China. And I really wanted to analyze it and go in and talk about it's not arms sales that does it. It's usually these diplomatic recognitions of Taiwanese sovereignty, and just kind of explore that. And so talking about the history of U.S.-Taiwan relations and pointing out how the United States pledges the one China policy, but actions speak louder than words. And by their actions, we can kind of say, I created this term feigned ambiguity. It's fake ambiguity because I believe that at the end of the day, and I try to support that by pointing to the past, but I believe that what we actually have is the United States will intervene in a Chinese invasion. And maybe I'm going out a little bit on a limb, but I try to support it with past, talking about the third Taiwan Strait crisis and the tit-for-tat escalations.
Well, that's not Ambassador Crocker's term. He said constructive ambiguity. We were trying to understand, like, what is the U.S. Middle East policy? Right? Wasn't that Ambassador Crocker? He said it's constructive ambiguity. We were like, so you're not going to tell us.
The whole term strategic ambiguity and all that, they drive me nuts. They don't mean anything.
Peter Van Buren wrote a piece about how strategic ambiguity works. And like, I have to say, if I was in Washington's position, I do think that ambiguity is a good policy. Not that I would agree with it per se, but
I definitely agree. I think strategic ambiguity, if anything, works extremely well in this situation. Yeah. It keeps things. The lack of clarity has done a really impressive job historically of deterring any potential actual, basically quick moves from Beijing, and I think keeping it vague is quite important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the terms are what I kind of object to, or just be a little more straightforward.
We're in the dark too, not just the Chinese. The American people don't really know what the policy is either.
Well, and it's crazy because people throw these terms around all the time as if everyone just knows what they are. But I've got to spend 2 paragraphs of every article explaining what, this magical thing called one China and this thing called strategic ambiguity are. And that's a messaging failure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, promised you guys we wouldn't go on for too long. So if you want some closing thoughts, and then I want to make sure that you tell everybody how to follow you, how to support your work, and all that stuff too. So maybe you want to do both that, closing comments and, plug your work, please. I want to go first, Connor, since you're at the top. Poor guy, he's getting called on first for everything.
Well, I guess my closing comment, and so this is related to that article I recently wrote. So there's a sentence in there, there's a phrase in there that asks the president, if this bill does pass, to evaluate if China has engaged in a significant escalation in hostile action since December of 2021. The magic question, if that bill does pass and if it keeps that December 2021 timetable, is will China's reaction to this visit qualify as that significant escalation? And that's really important because built into that bill are a series of really stringent sanctions against much of China's economy that would go all the way up to Xi Jinping, the president of China himself. So it could be a pretty significant reaction if this bill does pass, and if they deem this to be, of course it's vague, but if they deem this to be a significant escalation, that's extremely worrisome. So there's my final thing. I hope that's not too scary, but I think it is worth being a little bit scared about. In terms of where to find my work, I publish frequently on responsiblestatecraft.org. And otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at Connor_Eccles. And I also just wanted to thank both of you for having me on the show. This has been really great. And I'm, thrilled to have had this interesting conversation with you all.
Patrick, want to go next?
Yeah, so I have a podcast, Liberty Weekly. It's at libertyweekly.net. I release episodes once a week, and I'm a little bit of a newcomer to foreign policy analysis. However, I've been doing episodes on it for maybe a year and a half or 2 years now. I've been writing on the topic for a shorter amount of time, but you can find my columns. I try and get them out once a week at libertarianinstitute.org/Patrick. Will get you the podcast feed, but otherwise, if you just keep looking at it, you'll see me at the top of the featured articles page.
And you're on Twitter a fair amount too, right?
Yeah, at liberty_weekly. And I appreciate the chance to get to meet you, Connor, and the rest of the panel. We've met before, so it's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it was great. Dan, any closing
Peter
thoughts?
Lee, who was amazing, by the way.
Yeah, I'm
And I'm very sorry that this didn't work out.
We may have to have a part two, because the three of you together, I think, would just is the perfect mix. But I don't think there's going to be any shortage of opportunity to talk about Taiwan and China, unfortunately. So, Dan, other than that, should we wrap it up?
Let's wrap it up, and I look forward to sanctioning China to blow up what's left of our economy.
And this is the first Around the Empire live too. So maybe I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but it wasn't a disaster.
They're good.
It wasn't a disaster.
Can always fix it up in post. That's my motto.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go. I know how to edit. All right. Thanks so much. See you later, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Our guest this evening is the host of the Liberty Weekly podcast, which you can find at libertyweekly.net. He's also an attorney and researcher, taking deep dives on libertarian topics, and also the Justin Raimondo Fellow at the Libertarian Institute. How about you get a few more things for me to read? Jesus, man. Patrick McFarlane, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me back on.
Patrick, you've been on a couple times, and I think every time you've been on, we had some predetermined topics to discuss, but I know something that you write about a lot and you're passionate about is foreign policy, and particularly relations with China. And we've never really had time to dive into that. And we're probably still not going to talk about alleged Uyghur genocide today either. I'm sorry to tell you that. But everybody's talking in the news about our wonderful Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, making a trip to Taiwan. So we're going to start there. What do you make, broad strokes, what do you make about Speaker Pelosi's trip to Taiwan?
Well, I think it's incredibly dangerous, and I think it marks the Biden administration. It's a administrational policy towards China, moving away from this idea of strategic ambiguity and the one China policy that has really been the bare bones of the foundation of U.S.-China policy since 1979. When the United States really began a rapprochement with China. At that time, it was an effort to kind of pry China away from Russia in kind of maybe what could have been a reunification after the Sino-Soviet split in, I believe, the 50s and 60s.
Now, I know a lot has been made of official remarks from Chinese officials in regards to Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, promising repercussions, saying that there would be consequences for her actions, strongly suggesting she should not visit the state. Do you think that that's mostly just hot air and political posturing, or do you think that this is a genuine existential threat?
I think it's a fair mix of both because, of course, you have China always saying extreme things. Usually what their rhetoric ramps up when the United States sends diplomatic envoys to Taiwan. Now, it's unofficial, but the United States, on paper, has an unofficial diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, but officially, they have no diplomatic relationship with Taiwan. But throughout the years, they have been doing de facto diplomacy with Taiwan. So when the United States does things specifically to recognize or to legitimize the sovereignty of Taiwan as an independent country, that is when China gets the most upset, and that is when we see the most drastic responses, actual kinetic military responses. Now, when I say kinetic, I mean they launch missiles across the strait that land close to Taiwan, or they'll conduct increasingly invasive patrols through the area, or they will fly warplanes in the Taiwanese Air Defense Identification Zone, which is not the same as legal airspace. One thing that you might see all over the place in right-wing media is, oh, China flew 23 planes in Taiwan's airspace, while what they're referring to is the Air Defense Identification Zone, which actually is a huge arbitrary line that overlaps mainland China to a large degree. And so technically, the PLA could have airplanes on the runway in Fujian province, which is the Chinese province directly across from Taiwan, and they would technically be violating the ADIZ because it's an arbitrary designation. So there's a whole lot to unpack there, Alan.
Now, kind of looking at sort of the domestic political angle here, Nancy Pelosi has been a chief leader of the Democratic Party for decades. And if you were to read any recent political news here in the States, you would think that there was a battle of an existential circumstances between the right-wing and left-wing politics in the United States. And yet, you have GOP leaders cheering on Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, saying that it's a great thing, saying that they support her actions despite what official Biden administration talking points might be about Taiwan's relationship with the United States. How does that come to be? Does it amaze you that China is the topic that can bring right-wing and left-wing political leaders together?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, like I said, the pivot to Asia happened under Obama, and the United States kind of gearing up a new Cold War with China and Russia, but specifically with China, has been a bipartisan foreign policy consensus that really began under Obama. It kind of stagnated for a few years, was picked up in earnest under Trump, and then Biden has just increased a lot of Trump's policies, which is I've mentioned a lot before on my shows, but surrounding China with military bases, creating military alliance with China's neighbors, having other European countries and other countries in theater conduct joint military operations with the United States, sailing warships through the Taiwan Strait at the rate of about once per month for the last couple years, training Taiwanese military, doing all these escalatory measures really to increase tension on China, accusing China of genocide on the world stage, which is something that we mentioned earlier but won't get to today. And I wanted to add something to an earlier point because you asked, is this really dangerous, or is China just saying things to bluster and puff out its chest? And I said it's kind of a mix of the two, but I don't want to diminish the actual alarm and point of crises that we're at right now, because we are at a point of crisis in the Taiwan Strait. This is the fourth time that this has occurred. The first crisis happened in early 1950s when you had the Korean War going on in the United States, recognizing the authority, the sovereignty of Taiwan at that time, because this goes all the way back to 1949 when Chiang Kai-shek and had lost to the communists in the mainland China and fled to the island of Taiwan and ruled that country. At the time, the United States recognized Taiwan as being a country. My stance is that the United States has no position on whether or not Taiwan is a country. I'm sure we'll address that a little bit later. But so the first crisis happened in the 50s. The United States presented the president at the time, whose name escapes me, Eisenhower, with options for military strikes inside China, but he declined that. Then in the 1950s, a few years later, you had another major crisis with, I think, China moving on certain islands surrounding Taiwan. Well, that stagnated for a while, but the third crisis happened in the 1990s when the then president of Taiwan, Lee Teng-hui, was issued a visa to speak at his alma mater in the United States at Cornell University, and he was received by U.S. congressmen there. He gave the speech where he talked about Taiwan being a thriving democracy and kind of hinted at Taiwanese independence, and that majorly really irritated and aggravated China. So they started conducting these rocket firing exercises where they would shoot surface-to-surface missiles at Taiwan, which landed closer and closer to Taiwan over the span of 4 to 5 months. And the United States responded by sailing 2 aircraft carriers through the Strait of Taiwan. And there was a bunch of brinksmanship between the United States and China when finally it had been going on between 1995 to 1996. And they had kind of a rapprochement and thankfully were able to de-escalate tensions in the area. But over that time, China deployed 150,000 of their soldiers to Fujian across the strait from Taiwan. And we're seeing an escalation picking up right where 1996 left off. China has actually, in response to Nancy Pelosi coming to Taiwan, has began military drills in the waters around Taiwan, sometimes encroaching on Taiwan's actual, their legal waters. I think, I don't know if that's 10 or 20 miles off of the coast, but this is a huge escalation and a new low, maybe the lowest point in U.S.-China relations in modern history, and it's incredibly dangerous. So thanks for indulging me there, Alan.
Oh, no problem. Well, something that came to mind there is how complicated or more complex is the issue when you look at things from a global economic standpoint? When you look at economic trade, when you look at the massive amount of products that are being imported in the United States that are made overseas, particularly in the East, particularly in places like China. Of course, the United States exports stuff too, mostly debt, but that relationship economically exists. And obviously, it only stands to reason that it would be hurt when diplomatic or political relationship between the countries degrades. Do you see that playing a major part of tensions going into the future? Can economics save this, or are we reaching a point where a decoupling has to happen?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I oppose the populist right so strongly, because although they don't openly call for war with China. Almost nobody is openly calling for war with China, but that's one thing that they'll tell you is, oh, no one's advocating for war with China. We just want to completely decouple from them economically. And the United States and China are each country respectively is one of the biggest trading partners of the other country. So we depend on China immensely for lots of our cheap consumer goods that raise our standard of living by providing products at cheap prices for regular people to consume. And one thing that Dave DeCamp really notified me of when I started talking to him about this topic, and he really alarmed me about it a few years ago, was that this economic decoupling probably has to happen before any major war between the United States and China could conceivably take place. And of course, that's because we rely on each other so heavily for staple items. And I had Joseph Solis Mullen on my show a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about this, and he pointed out just exactly how dependent China itself is on imports for staple goods, because China itself, I think he said on my show, don't quote me, look this up, but that China has less successful agricultural land per square mile than Saudi Arabia does. So it would stand to reason then that if they import a lot of their staple food items, the United States or the collective West blockading China or putting harsh sanctions on them, a la what we've seen in Russia, actually wouldn't. It would hurt them a lot more than it has Russia. And with Russia, we've seen it backfire a lot. So I think it stands to reason that the economic part connecting, the economic relations connecting the United States with China is a huge barrier to conflict, but we see a lot of hawks trying to eliminate that linkage and get the United States more, dependent on other countries for our staple items, because certainly the regulations in our country and the lockdowns have kneecapped us from being able to support ourselves on that front.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here with you, Patrick, a little bit, because you mentioned sort of opposing the populist right wing and the nationalists who would perhaps maybe a short way to put it is that what they're advocating would set the stage for future more serious disagreements between the two countries. I want to read for you a few different positions that are very commonly heard and get your perspective. The first one is, and this is for our libertarian audience out there specifically, the Chinese Communist Party is evil, Patrick. They're just awful. And supporting Taiwanese self-determination and independence is the libertarian position. What do you say to that?
Well, when I hear this, I think a lot about Jeff Deist and speeches that he gave when I was a very new libertarian, talking about being against libertarian universalism, because and that is to say that we only have, it's that liberation is not the goal, self-determination is the goal. And as someone sitting in the United States, of course, I have sympathy for people who want freedom and liberty all across the globe. But what is my role as a Roman living in the Roman Empire? What is my goal in assisting them in that pursuit? And I have no role to play in that as a member of the United States. And a lot of this is, well, do you live in Ancapistan in your head? I mean, to borrow a talking point from some libertarian detractors. But I think it's apt here because we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a world where the United States is the global hegemon. And when the United States says we want to bring freedom and democracy, first off, well, we don't have freedom and democracy that we really can bring to other nations. We've destroyed that at home. But you can't spread freedom and democracy at the barrel of the gun. You can't do it by instigating these regime change operations that leave countries in complete turmoil with failed states, and we have plenty of examples of those in Iraq being one and Libya being another one, and the laundry list just goes on and on. So we don't have the ability to liberate these people. We don't have the freedom to give to them, and everything that we do just makes things a whole lot worse. So I wish these people well. I mean, I I wouldn't even airdrop copies of For a New Liberty in these countries. The United States has no part in this to play, no part that's good, and we should just mind our own business and let freedom organically develop. And moreover, people in these countries might not want freedom, and I'm not one to impose freedom on these people.
By the way, around here we call those LEOs, Liberty Enforcement Officers.
Yeah.
It's the Liberty Enforcement Officers are the ones who are going to enforce. I mean, if you break it down, they're just enforcing their worldview upon others with nary a care in the world about the political pendulum swinging the other way and those guns being pointed right back at them. I do want to point out really quick before we move on to the next devil's advocate point that when you read a phrase like supporting Taiwanese self-determination, the real crux of the argument is define the word supporting, right? What do you mean by supporting? I mean, I support everyone's self-determination and independence so much as I want it for them. But I think Patrick, you make an interesting point that when you're a Roman citizen in the Roman Empire, do we have the liberty to give other people? As you know, is that a consumer good that we can export? You would say no.
Right, it's not. It's not something that we can export. I mean, especially at the point of a gun. But like I said, if we're in the situation where we are trying to impose liberty or we're trying to instigate some kind of coup in a certain country, it's like artificially messing with the market. You know, we know that as libertarians, and I guess this is a really libertarian specific argument, but we know that there is a natural order that comes about when you leave people organically decentralized fashion to create to transact with each other consensually. And when you mess with that, you have unintended consequences. And that's exactly what happens when we mess with the governments of other countries. And moreover, the people in those countries don't get a say about the matter. And I wanted to point out that when people say that when we are supporting liberty and democracy in Taiwan, while that's not always the case, because the Republic of China government, I believe they had martial law for a long stretch of time from 1949 until the 80s. And so it's clearly not about supporting liberty and democracy as much as it is just encircling China.
I'm gonna hit you with another one here, Patrick. Somebody is going to dominate the globe. It's just the way of the world. So if someone's going to do it, it might as well be the United States. American hegemony is good for the world. Do you agree with that statement?
No, absolutely I don't. But I struggle to understand exactly. It's like Tim Pool talks about this all the time, which is someone I've criticized.
Here we go.
But I think it's a fair point to make. It's like, you know, we're all in a movie theater and we're all watching one screen, but half of the people in the movie theater are watching one film and the other half are watching a different film, even though they're watching the same screen. So I just don't know. There's never really any evidence really to support this argument that the United States, because what's the alternative? Well, we have no idea what the alternative is, because the United States has been the world hegemon for the last 60, ever since World War II. And we have nothing to compare it to. What we do have are concrete examples of the United States, risking world annihilation by competing with other nuclear powers, starting proxy wars on their doorstep that have the risk of obliterating all life on this planet. Not to mention all the regime change operations where the United States has killed people with impunity, imposed sanctions on countries that don't fall in order, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. And that's just the reality of it. So I don't know. I guess you could say, well, things would be a lot worse if we just had a different policy. So therefore, we have to keep trying this policy. I think it's just a fallacious argument that's supported by just anecdotes, assertions.
Speaking of that, I know you and I are both Ron Paul guys, and something that we discussed just the other day was that the non-interventionism was a key component of the Ron Paul revolution, is understanding the difference between isolationism and non-interventionism. Really just being anti-war as a central plank of whatever policy you might be building. But there are people who say this: non-interventionism doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because appeasement and validation of dictators doesn't make for a peaceful world. Patrick, you got to have an iron fist with these monsters. Do you agree with that?
Well, that is often said to as like, I don't know, it's used as a whip. That statement is used as a whip to say that our current leaders are not being tough enough, because, you know, one thing Tim Pool says a lot specifically is that, well, Russia and China never would have moved on Ukraine and Taiwan if Donald Trump were president, because Trump told Xi and Putin that if you move on Ukraine and Taiwan respectively, I'm going to nuke Moscow and Beijing, and that's just what's going to happen. So they're always using this rhetoric to say that our leaders are too weak, and that's the problem. We need to be more hawkish and more aggressive, and then these problems wouldn't happen. When instead, I think that objectively, if you look at these administrations, you see that particularly Trump and Biden have been extremely aggressive towards Russia and China. I mean, Trump left nuclear arms control treaties with Russia. He sent these these shoulder-fired rockets to Ukraine in use against the Russian military, when even Obama wouldn't do that. He had new bases in Poland, ramping up all these exercises in the Black Sea, in Eastern Europe with NATO, simulating nuclear strikes on Moscow. I don't know if Biden did that, but there's all these examples, of ways that Trump and Biden have been incredibly hawkish towards Russia and China. And that talking point that, oh, well, we can't just appease dictators. Well, we haven't even tried appeasing dictators. What we've been doing is being as hawkish as you would like to be. That's what's objectively is happening. So I just think that's a garbage argument.
Well, I know an easy analogy to make that I've seen going around the internet is that whenever, particularly as it relates to China and Taiwan, is that at the end of the day, China is pursuing its own quote unquote vital interests in the South China Sea. And while you and I might not agree with China or the methods in which it pursues its quote unquote vital interests, the fact of the matter is that they're doing it, and they're doing it in the South China Sea. And how is that any different than, say, the United States pursuing its vital interests in the Gulf of Mexico, or, turning an eye to Cuba? I know these analogies have been made before, but, what would the United States think if Russia was building military bases, just south of the Rio Grande? What would the United States think if China was sailing aircraft carriers into the Gulf of Mexico because they were concerned about, democracy in Cuba? What would the United States think about that?
Well, here's where you're wrong, Alan. You're wrong.
Uh-oh.
You're wrong, because the United States is special. We are ordained by God that our people are here to provide liberty and democracy to the globe. And that's the way it is. So we can't turn the tables, Alan, and think about how we would feel if other countries did what we're doing, because they're not special. We are exceptional. We are the exceptional nation. That is the United States. And the world oceans are our lakes. And all we need to do is, keep peace and order, make sure those trade routes are open, and completely obliterate anyone who might want to have their own region of influence in their near abroad.
One last little point here, Patrick, before we wrap up, is I know there's been a lot of talk about how the U.S. Armed Forces are scrambling a bit right now because recruitment's down. They're not able to meet their recruitment goals, I think, across any of the major branches of the military, and they're discussing ways that we got to pump up those numbers. Do you sort of see that kind of like the invisible hand of the market making itself known, that if the U.S. military is unable to recruit at the levels that they would like, that's sort of a way of young potential military recruits telling the U.S. empire, we don't want to be a part of this.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think I wrote a little piece on this talking about the Battle of the Somme in World War One. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the Battle of the Somme was one of the largest battles of all time. The British, on the first day of the battle, lost almost, I think it was 20,000 soldiers, 10 or 20,000 soldiers in the bloodiest day. I think over the course of the battle, it lasted maybe like 6 months, that the British ended up losing like 80,000 soldiers to casualties and KIAs. And my whole point was, how would the United States react today if there was a battle with similar casualties? And I think one of my main points was that I think, judging by the COVID reaction, I think that society would grind to a halt, that we would just cease to function because we're so soft nowadays. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing in a way, because the United States as a nation, we're so casualty adverse, and we've never really had to face real casualties since the Vietnam War. But even then, they weren't as large as some conflicts like World War II and World War I. And if that were to happen today, I just don't know how society would react if we had one Battle of the Somme. If the United States gets in some kind of military kinetic engagement with the PLA around Taiwan, if we lose one aircraft carrier, that's 3,000 soldiers, 3,000 seamen, rather, sailors that we would lose in the span of a couple hours. That's more than we lost on 9/11. So the stakes here are incredibly high for the United States. I mean, not to mention the risk of nuclear war or some kind of real prolonged conflict with China. And so I hope that this trend continues, but it'd be interesting to see how the military addresses it in terms of, will they reinstitute a draft? And now we have freedom and equality of having women and men qualify for the draft. Unless I'm mistaken. Am I right about that, Alan, that women have to register?
I think that did ultimately pass. I think with roaring approval from our left-wing friends, because goodness knows we all have to be enslaved and sent into the trenches equally. You know, in a weird collapsitarian sort of way, Patrick, I love legislation like that, because I think that there's a lot more people waking up. A lot of your middle America type people who were perfectly content to tie the ribbons on their trees and perfectly content to always say, well, I might not agree with the government, but I'm going to support the troops. A lot of those people are suddenly saying, you're not having my daughter.
Yeah. And
you know what? If that's what it took to get you to bow your back to these people, then, you know, I'm glad it happened. But I want to say this, and I'm going to let you have the final word. If history teaches us anything, is that in these imperialist ambitions, these globe-trotting empires don't last. And I know that folks like you and I might say that, look, the American empire is going to collapse. And I've always thought it won't collapse because of external enemies. It'll collapse under the weight of its own debt and hubris. That's what'll happen. But if China tries to fill that void, it'll happen to them too. But I think what's way more important for true liberty-minded folks who are truly anti-war to understand is we want to minimize and negate any potential wide-ranging worldwide conflicts that could lead superpowers into war. Because if we truly believe that empires will collapse on their own, then we want there to be a world left over for the people to enjoy when those empires are done globetrotting.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a whole lot to that. But I don't believe that, personally, I don't believe that China has the ability to become a world empire. With the way that their economy is set up, and I'll refer again to my episode that I just did with Joseph Solis Mullen to talk about the sheer economics of it. But, you know, David Stockman is someone we all appreciate and respect, and he's been calling China the Red Ponzi for decades. And I think it's just a matter of time. But I don't honestly believe that China has the ability to really be a world empire. I think they will struggle, honestly, to have hegemony over their near abroad even. And So I don't understand why we can't have normal relations with these countries, why Russia and China can't be welcome to the world stage, why we can't be happy about two nations who have rising standards of living for their people and enough power on the world stage to really, maybe we could bring in, if we just got along, maybe we could bring in some kind of economic golden age for the earth. And I think that the powers that shouldn't be probably have some alternative plan, because one thing I don't cover a whole lot, but I always like to say exists, is the fact that, we're looking at the 2D chessboard, to use the analogy, but there is powers in this world that transcend national borders and moneyed financial interests that are behind both sides of this conflict, just like every conflict in the history of mankind. So it's interesting to see how those things interplay, and in terms of what the end game is, we can only speculate. But I do fear that there is that part of that end game involves a real conflict between the United States and China and Russia, and the broader West as well. And so to end and touch on the point that we're at now, right? I mentioned before, the Taiwan Relations Act in 1979 really outlined what's been called strategic ambiguity, and that right now the United States' reputation for not sticking with that strategic ambiguity, at least saying that they're adhering to those principles, our credibility is thrown out the window, because our lips say one thing and our actions do another one. And our actions have said that we will support Taiwan and we will intervene in the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And Pelosi going to the island has completely destroyed any credibility that we have with China. Even Biden thought it was not a good idea. The Pentagon thought it was a good idea, but I think they tacitly approved of the trip because they did absolutely nothing to stop it. So now we have a crisis, the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis going on. The PLA is doing all these military drills surrounding the island of Taiwan. I think that sanctions and a total blockade of the island will follow. And this crisis could last for months, just like the third Taiwan crisis did in the 90s. And so this morning, Nancy Pelosi left Taiwan. She left Taiwan in the lurch, where now she kicked off a huge firestorm. Now she's leaving. See ya. Peace. Don't give a shit about you. And so that's the situation that we're at. And it doesn't look very good, Alan.
Boy, I wonder if Pelosi cares as much about her constituents in San Francisco as she does about the Taiwanese people.
Yeah, right. Well, the truth is, she doesn't give a shit about either of them.
Okay. Well, Patrick, we're out of time.
Yeah.
I promise someday we will talk about all the poor Uyghurs being genocided.
Oh, man. Do you want people to hate you? Hate me?
You say, do I want, as if it's not a current frame of existence. Patrick, where can people go to support you and hear more about these topics?
Yeah, well, you can go to my membership website at libertyweekly.club, where I have a newsletter where I send out preprints of my articles and bonus content there. Otherwise, you can catch my articles at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com. They're usually rerun at antiwar.com. So that's where you can find me. libertyweekly.club, libertyweekly.net.
Patrick, we're going to get you out of here on this one. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Is a waffle a cake?
Is a waffle a cake? No. Is that the right answer?
Oh, no, Patrick. Unfortunately, a waffle is simply a cake. Patrick, we've got to shame our friends and brothers who eat cake for breakfast. Pancakes and waffles are both cakes.
They are cakes, huh? They call it a Belgian waffle. Is that because it has, like, I don't know, they put some kind of oil in it to make it poof up? Is that the definition of a cake?
But it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
Anyway, Patrick, you did your best. We flailed here in the bonus round, but thanks very much for being back on the show, buddy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too, Alan. Thanks.
Guys, we're going to be back to wrap up the show right after this commercial break. Stick around. If you're enjoying tonight's show, consider supporting the program by becoming a member of our Patreon. That's over at patreon.com/Alan Mosley. Like our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Alan Mosley TV. You can follow me on Twitter. It's twitter.com/Alan Mosley TV. Subscribe to our YouTube page. It's youtube.com/Alan Mosley TV. Also, you can get us on Odyssey. Go and support a free speech platform. It's Odyssey. It's Too Late with Alan Mosley or @Alan Mosley TV. If you're more of a listener than a watcher, you can get us on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, thanks to Anchor FM. That's anchor.fm/Alan Mosley TV. Hi, Adam. Glad you could be here tonight. Dave, do you have a final thought?
Oh, final thought. It's awesome having Patrick McFarland on. I love Family Guy. It's cool that he made time in his schedule to come in.
Right?
So, yeah, it's a great show.
Yeah. We're out of time.
Yeah.
What do you think? After party?
Definitely.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Ooh, definitely. Nice. After party's on Twitch, everybody. But if you're not there, thank you so much for watching It's Too Late, and we will see you next week.
That's cool that it came on.
You know, I was going to send you a picture earlier today when I was running errands, because I was going to tell you that we hit a cold spell. It wasn't in the hundreds anymore, because on my dash it said 99.
That's the stuff.
Nah,
What?
you'll
Oh,
you get used to it.
a human too.
Yeah.
You figure,
You're just
like,
trying to find out if you're still alive, you know.
Yeah.
I don't hear anything you're saying right now. What the hell?
It's